Hey guys, welcome back to What the Fat. Today I have on a very special guest, someone I've been looking for someone with her expertise for a very long time. And I think before I introduce her, I have to give a quick background about how I found her. So obviously there's a lot going on right now in like the vegan, carnivore, keto, mixture world. And I did this video, and it's actually very timely because at the time we're recording this, Arnold Schwarzenegger's documentary is actually coming out tomorrow. It's called Game Changers, and I did this whole video about my thoughts and opinion on like kind of Arnold making the switch, because obviously bodybuilding, we did a lot in the bodybuilding world. Arnold was like this iconic hero, and now he's making this documentary on veganism, and so obviously there's a lot of thoughts on it, but I saw, and everyone was in the office was like, oh, like, you know, everyone was on board and understood it. And all of a sudden someone reached out and they're like, this lady wrote this like open letter to Ellen. You have to read this. Like, you have to, because I love Ellen. Like, I'm a huge Ellen fan. I love what she does. And I was like, oh, she wrote this open letter, but it's like about nutrition and it's about eating meat. And I'm like, I need to read this. And so that's really how I found you. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's so spot on. I need to have her on the show. So with that being said, Amanda, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, and very cool roundabout way of connecting with each other. So I'm excited to be here.
For sure. And your story's amazing. And I'm excited to dive into that letter because like I like read it thoroughly. Like I've read a lot of the articles that you've written on like the beef blog, and it's amazing because you're an incredible writer. But before we jump into that, can you tell people a little bit about like your background, like growing up, kind of what got you into ranching, things like that?
Sure. I grew up on a ranch in South Dakota, so we've always had beef cows around as long as I know. I'm actually a fifth generation, so my whole family's been involved in agriculture, and so it's my passion. I have my husband Tyler are back on my family's ranch, and we're raising now the sixth generation. We have three little kids here, and so it really is our heart and soul. Every day it's beef cattle, and it's, you know, calving out baby calves in the spring and, you know, raising them up and knowing they're ultimately going to be beef and also life enriching byproducts. And so it truly is our passion, our love, and it's a really rewarding experience, but comes with its own set of challenges, as you can imagine, as well. And then I write for, like you mentioned, Beef Magazine. And so it's really cool to be able to take my passion and what I've done my whole life and be able to talk about some of these issues on a platform like beefmagazine.com.
That's awesome. And a lot of those articles are incredible. And I think that's where I first saw your like letter was published in there. And I want to jump into that. I want to jump into like that letter that you, first off, what inspired you? What inspired you to write that? Was it that Ellen had come out with that little segment? I didn't see it until I saw your article about like,
promoted it more than it needed to, maybe.
No, it's very important. So she came out and basically was talking about climate change and the importance of saving the planet by eating less meat. Is that really what inspired your letter?
Right. And so her video was basically, it was on Instagram, and it said, you know, to save the planet, to improve our health, and to, you know, save animals too, we should be neat and eat less meat. And I've told all the media that I've talked to in the last week that I really don't have a problem with her, you know, eating differently than me. I'm obviously a huge supporter of beef in the diet. But it's just, you know, the misinformation that she shared in that video. And I was going to ignore it at first, but then I scrolled through the thousands of comments from, you know, her millions of fans who were saying, like, I'm glad I listened to this. I'm not going to eat meat anymore. And so I really wanted to give consumers, you know, the other side of the story we don't hear in the media, because beef has a really great story to tell, both from a nutritional standpoint and an environmental standpoint. And I just want consumers to be able to make informed decisions at the grocery store. And ultimately, I don't want celebrities or politicians or anyone to dictate how I eat. And so, you know, this isn't empty calories we're talking about. This is a nutrient-dense product, and it shouldn't be demonized the way it has.
100%. And I'm excited to dive into that because there's a lot of things. And you bring up some great points in there, and I want to go through kind of each one about it. But I don't know if you saw, because like a lot of celebrities are jumping, and we'll talk about the Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger, but like a lot of celebrities are like endorsing those mainly investing in, but also like participating in those. And we'll talk about kind of our, I guess, I think I have similar thoughts to you on that. But like recently I saw like Will and I think it's Jada Smith had to like do an intervention with their son because like I think he went vegan and he was like having some complications. Did you see that?
Yeah, he was like turning gray and pale. And I think now he's gone back to vegetarian, but
Okay.
imagine how great he would be if he would add meat back to his diet, you know. And it is, if you're not carefully supplementing a vegan diet, you're going to be devoid of, nutrients like B12 that is naturally found in animal products. So it's, unless it's carefully monitored, it isn't like the one, the magic bullet to health.
Right. 100. And are you familiar with a guy named Sean Baker?
Yes, yes. In
Okay.
fact, he spoke at a cattlemen's meeting I was at actually. So Cowboys got to listen to his story here recently too, which is really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've seen him post. He posts a lot. He's a good friend. He has like this whole like vegan recovery group of like people who have gone vegan and like started incorporating in some meat and like now we're seeing a lot of health markers improve. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about celebrities, I was really excited because the Kardashians, I keep up with the Kardashians a little bit. Well, Kim K was, after she had her baby, she had went to a keto diet or low carb diet. So I was like, this is so cool. And now since they've all gone vegan or vegetarian, and I see Kylie Jenner right now is hospitalized. And I don't know if it's diet related or not, but she's very sick. And it's like, girls, just get back to that animal fats and proteins and you'll feel a lot better.
Exactly. And it's honestly one of the biggest things I'm super worried about. And that's why I'm super excited this podcast is going to come out when it is. Like, we moved a lot of things around to make this one come out earlier because that movie, like Arnold's movie's coming out tomorrow. And there's a lot of athletes that are going to see that. And like, you're starting to see these athletes like Cam Newton's like a big advocate of a vegan vegetarian diet. You're seeing some of these other basketball athletes that are coming out. And a lot of them are like, I don't know if it's correlative, but like a lot of them are getting injured, and they're getting injured and it's likely due to nutrient deficiencies due to their diet. And it's like, I don't like Arnold, who's like supposed to be the icon of muscle and bodybuilding, is coming out advocating for this. And it's just worrisome, especially if it's not properly supplemented, which a large majority of people who are probably eating vegan or vegetarian aren't supplementing the right way.
Not taking the blood tests and knowing what you're deficient in. And that's the thing, like eating meat in your diet, you're getting it. You're getting the nutrients. It's just intuitive. You don't have to carefully track because everything is there that you need. And I hope these athletes kind of take a page from like Kobe Bryant or LeBron James, who went keto or low carb and they're saving their knees and their joints and extending their athletic careers because, hey, they're eating the good stuff. So yeah, but I guess I now have a new blog idea for myself as well. I'm going to have to be watching Arnold and seeing what he has to say and writing another letter.
Exactly. I would love that. So let's jump into the nutrition, because when I talked and I did this video, because I'm like super open about it. And I've like always I've had friends like in the keto world that are like, like one of my good friends, Dr. Will Cole, wrote a book called Ketotarian, where it's like mostly plant-based, but he also incorporates in a little bit of here and there. Now he has like a little bit of meat, probably
Sure.
because he's seen like a lot of changes with it, and fish. But like
Sure.
a lot of the statements, like you said earlier, are just false. Like, and there's a lot of misleading concepts. So the first one I want to talk about, which you brought up in the letter, is the nutrition, right? So like, this is something I've been big on. Like 3 ounces of beef is radically like the equivalent of that in plant-based protein, which is also deficient in a lot of amino acids, is very different. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. So the breakdown, so a 3-ounce serving of lean beef would be 173 calories. You get 10 essential nutrients and half of your daily value of protein. So to get that same, 25 grams of protein that's recommended, you would need to eat 3 cups of quinoa, which is 666 calories, 6.5 tablespoons of peanut butter for 613 calories, nearly 2 cups of black beans for 379 calories, or 1 cup of edamame for 249 calories. And so just calorie for calorie, beef is unmatched, really. And, I think that ties into the climate stuff too, because it's a nutrient dense food. So you're getting the best bang for your buck, really, nutritionally, environmentally, etc.
Right. That's a great point, and something that I think often goes unnoticed because, like, as we'll talk about, like, even with the carbon emission conversation, like, the amount of food that you need to eat to get that protein requirements, like, double or triple in some instances because meat has so nutrient dense. So, like, there's never been any, like, even though we'll talk about the carbon emission aspect, but like people don't even think about that part when they're talking about how much would be required, like on a protein gram for gram basis, radically different.
And let's not forget that beef has is it heme iron? Yes,
Yep.
or non-heme. So it's more absorbable in the body compared to plant-based foods, which don't have that. And so you're absorbing the nutrients better. It's an efficient way to get your protein. And we see all these athletes, buying expensive protein shakes and protein bars. And there's a whole group of ranchers that run on Team Beef, it's called. So you can get a jersey. It's got a steak on the front and the back, and they'll even sponsor your races. But they're like basically saying to other athletes, like, hey, go get a cut of steak or a hamburger, and you're going to get, the protein you need to fuel this race, so I'm a big fan of that as well.
I love that. Team Beef. I'm on board.
Yeah.
I love that. And like going on, and people are starting to be like, yeah, you're hammering the point, but at the same token, like the amino acid profile, like that alone, we've done research in our lab because we've done a lot of research on different qualities of protein. And one of the things that is like meat-based proteins and dairy-based proteins, like the amino acid profile, the branched chain amino acids, which are the most important for muscle mass, longevity, all of those aspects, are much higher in meat-based proteins than plant-based proteins. Like there's no plant-based protein that even comes close to a meat-based protein as far as amino acid profile, and people miss that point.
When I think, on the fat side of things, the saturated fats have been demonized since the 1970s or 80s when the dietary guidelines came out, and it was, avoid the saturated fats. And, we've gone so far now the other way that it's, eat the plant-based, eat beans when you can in place of, animal fats and proteins, and meat, dairy, and eggs. They used to be such a staple in our society. And now as we've demonized them, we've also seen, obesity rates skyrocket, heart disease, diabetes, and all these other complications. And everyone still wants to blame the beef, but I have a feeling we consume a lot of other foods, fast foods, quick carbohydrates, and it's really not the beef that's causing these problems.
Exactly. It's the Big Mac that has 18 other things inside of it.
The bun and the super French fries and the soda. Yeah, but it's the patty, right? It's the patty. It's
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I want to go to your second point because you bring up another great point here, and it says that eating plant-based is better for animals. Can you talk about that? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. So, I love Ellen's heart. She is kind-hearted. She's compassionate. She's always been a champion for animals. In my letter, I said, I love animals too. We have this adorable black lab dog that our family, it's beloved member of our family. We have these, I'm looking out the window right now and I can see cattle grazing in my pasture. And, we're really these caretakers for these, our pets and our livestock, and also the wildlife that call our ranch home as well. But I think, in today's society, most people aren't really aware or exposed to that relationship between the human and animal as it used to be. As from a young age, I understood the circle of life and that everything lives and everything dies, but death with a purpose gives meaning to life. And so for that beef animal, I haven't elevated that cow to a greater value than a human being. And I know that that animal ultimately is going to nourish people and provide, hundreds of life-enriching byproducts, everything from pharmaceuticals to makeup to stearic acid in our tires. And there's even things in like our roadways that come from beef animals. And so we utilize that animal from nose to tail in a way that's respectful. And ultimately, we are helping humanity. And so that's kind of my vantage point. But for the rest of society, who your exposure to animals is your pets or Disney movies, where the animal is the main character, and has the emotions and, walks and talks, and the rancher is the side character, well, we've kind of have this Disney effect on animals. And so it is a difficult conversation to have because, the activists find me and they, basically, claim to have the morality and the, moral high ground than me because I can, consume a living creature. But I also will contend on that note that no diet or every diet, whether you're eating a salad or eating a steak, has death. Because if I were to take my pasture and plow it up to grow crops, which my pastures would be unsuitable for that purpose, but if I were to do that, I would misplace the deer and the fox and the squirrel and the rabbit, on and on, all these animals that live in this rangeland. And so every diet has some animal death and suffering, and it's just kind of the way of life and the reality. It's not fun to think about, but it is part of humanity and supporting mankind on this planet.
Yes, and that's an incredible point. And I actually brought that up in the video as well because I've never heard the Disney effect, but I love that's so true because a lot of times, like, I have a dog, he's literally laying right next to me right now. He's like my life. So it's not that I don't love animals, but like you hit the nail on the head when you said it's like understanding that they're for nourishment, like the aspect of like that those cattle that are out there are going to nourish a ton of people, like you said, not only directly but indirectly as well. Right. And I think a lot of times, not even the displacement of the other animals, the deer, the bunnies, but like I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast one time, and he had a guest on that was talking about when they need like harvested crops, and he's like, well, the amount of animals that get killed to make tofu is insane or like that to make grains, because like you think those tractors that are going through those fields care about what's in its way? No. So like you're killing a bunny, you're killing bunny, mice, rat, like everything along its path, and like there's zero nourishment out of that now because it just got run over and plowed by a tractor to make tofu for someone who thinks that they're making a better decision because it's not a big cute cow. Instead, right. They don't realize the little rat or the whatever is in the field that they just ran over and killed that's not going to provide anyone any nourishment now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, nobody likes to think about that something has to suffer or die for, what we eat or how, we can live. But yeah, it's like I said, every diet has some kind of animal suffering, whether you're a vegan or a meat eater. And so it's just part of really being, I think as a society, our consumer is so far removed from agriculture that, where they're getting their information is, YouTube or the media. And I just wish people had the opportunity to come visit me in South Dakota and see what's happening here or get more connected to their food. And so I really think it's great, that people like you and others in this community are really engaged in having these conversations. And I'm honestly just so thrilled to be talking to you because I'm reaching, a different set of people than I normally talk to, which is farmers and ranchers, right? We already understand what we're doing. And so it's really your community that is amazing for us to be able to connect with and talk about some of our shared values as well.
For sure. And you guys are doing incredible work. And I love the fact that you're putting out that information. And it is that we're so far removed from it because a lot of times, like you said, like it's really a perfect example, like the Disney effect. We think of all these animals as like cute and cuddly and like they're all amazing. And like I am one of the biggest animal lovers in the world. But like there's actually an Instagram page I follow, and I literally everyone I know now follows this page. It's called Nature is Metal. And like for me, it was like, sometimes it's really brutal. But like it's a constant reminder for me to understand like, wow, like nature really is what it is, and it's literally like about things that happen in nature for these animals to survive. Like they're eating other animals, they're like going through this, and I'm like, what? It's like it's somewhat barbaric in a sense, but like we're so removed from it, and we're in our little box that it's right. Like, oh, that stuff doesn't happen. Like, no, it happens daily. I'd rather utilize that to nourish people and allow them to do good and not take that for granted. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces. I think like the nourishment piece alone, like being able to look at that and go, this is food that's meant to nourish my body. I would look at it as an absolute disgrace or waste if I went out and like didn't use that to my full potential. Like if I just sat on the couch all day and played video games, like no, I'm using that to fuel my body to go out and do something better in the world. And I think a lot of people just don't put two and two together to see that.
And again, like you said, it's barbaric, or it's hard to think about, but we're so spoiled. We don't have to hunt, fish, gather, anything. We can go to the grocery store, we can shop our values, get exactly what we want, whether it's nutrition or, production method or, whatever label you want to buy. And so, yeah, it is kind of hard to wrap your head around when your exposure to animals is, like petting zoos and your dogs and cats. And yeah, but I can also watch out my window and, I could see a fox or a hawk, hunting a rabbit in the field, or, a pheasant, laying her eggs and having her nest, but having it, get poached by a raccoon, or it's happening every single day. But unless you can see it with your own eyes, you don't necessarily think about it or want to wrap your head around it.
Exactly right. So let's jump into the biggest one, right? So like, I don't think there's any argument to be made on the other two. Like the nutritional profile of meat is incredible. At anything that we eat, at some point there's death, whether we like to admit it or not. Now the biggest one, I think this is where a lot of the advocates come from, is the toll that it has on our environment. And that's a very, very big piece. So I would love to get your insight of kind of like what the actual impact of beef is on the environment.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's so much to unpack, because that climate change connection dates back to 2006 is really when it got its start. So the United Nations came out with a study called Livestock's Long Shadow, and it came out and claimed that the majority of greenhouse gas emissions come from beef cattle. And it largely understated like transportation and electricity. So to kind of give you an example, it compared, on the beef side of things, it compared every single emission from raising the corn to feed the cattle, like the emissions from the farming side, all the way to refrigerating of the beef at the retail. And the transportation, they only measured tailpipe emissions. And so instead of like the entire manufacturing from start to finish, right? So it was just totally wrong. It's been since debunked. But I always say a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth can put on its tennis shoes. And this is truly an example of that. And so the beef industry hasn't been able to unring this bell. I mean, it's truly just plagued us for 13 years now. And now it seems like it's really taking off, because these activists have realized, well, we can't influence, consumer decisions based on, environment or animal welfare or nutrition. So we're going to go on the climate side and guilt people into thinking I can save the planet if I can give up meat on Mondays or whatever it might be. And so a really great resource on this, if people want to learn more, because they don't have to take my word for it. I'm just a cowgirl, in South Dakota. But Frank Mitloner out of UC Davis is an expert, air specialist expert, who studies this stuff, studies the emissions of cattle. And he has a really great article out, and I was trying to pull it up, but it kind of debunks some of the common misconceptions. Here, I'll see if, his article that you should go read is titled, "No, 4 pounds of beef doesn't equal the emissions of a transatlantic flight." And that just came out, and it really breaks it down. But ultimately, I think people need to know that today's beef producer in the United States produces the same amount of beef with 33% fewer cattle compared to 1977. And we do that with just 8% of the world's cattle. And so we're more efficient today using fewer natural resources. And we have the lowest carbon footprint of anywhere in the world, up to 10 to 50 times lower. And so the EPA, I believe, they say it's 3.7% total emissions in the United States today comes from animal agriculture. And I think it's 2% for just cattle. But to put it in perspective, if every American were to go meatless on Mondays, it would reduce our emissions by just like 0.37%, or like less than 0.5%. And so I've been encouraging people, if they truly want to make a dietary change, in addition to reducing your use of plastics or turning off the lights or, carpooling or, not driving as much. But if they want to make a dietary change to impact planetary health, we need to focus on reducing food waste, because 40% of all the food in the United States goes uneaten. And so that is an incredible thing we could work on and improve upon. We need to respect the harvest and eat what we buy, and not let it spoil in the refrigerator.
I love that point, and it's something I tell people all the time, like, because right now there's a huge push on not only the meatless Mondays, but there are some schools that are going completely meatless to try and improve this. And obviously, based on just even the nutritional profile that we talked about alone, like, you're putting kids' health at jeopardy by doing so. And I think that's a terrible idea. To not even let them make a decision at lunchtime. You're making the decision for them. But also, just like you said, people buy stuff and then it spoils and they throw it out. So, like, I think a better initiative from some of these celebrities or people who are out there would be like, hey, like not only composting, but like figuring out ways to like not buy as much. Like, that's one of the biggest benefits of like living a ketogenic lifestyle is like a lot of people intermittent fast. They like fast and then they'll have like their 1 or 2 meals a day where they're eating meat and maybe some vegetables, and that's it. Or they're just eating meat and like they just go on with their life.
Snacking all day long on empty calories that aren't doing anything to fuel your body or, make you a stronger, smarter, better person. They're just, mindless. But yeah, exactly. I would agree totally. And I'm glad you brought up the school lunches too. This is like something I'm so passionate about. So in New York City, Mayor de Blasio implemented meatless Mondays for all the public schools. And to put this into perspective and why this makes me just so mad is 75% of the kids in New York City qualify for free or reduced lunches. 10% of the kids are homeless. And to take a nutrient-dense food off the menu like meat and is depriving these kids of a healthy meal, probably their only decent meal they're going to get in a day. And to impose your elitist ideologies on these kids is, frankly, I think it's child abuse. And I think he's not serving the very people who elected him into that position. And I just think it's a travesty and just like so disconnected from like the hungry people in the United States today. I mean, 1 in 4 kids goes to bed hungry at night. And we live in the land of plenty where we're throwing away food and not getting it into the hands of the kids that need it the most. And as a mom of 3 and as a farmer and rancher, that really weighs on my heart much more than all of these other side pieces do.
100%. And to make it even worse, I just saw someone that's in the carnivore community recently posted something. It might have been Sean posted something about like a school in the UK like completely getting rid of meat. Like they won't even serve it in their school anymore. And like you said, like to not even to remove something that's extremely nutrient dense. Like if they're trying to give kids an option, give them an option to make it, at least give them an option to make an educated decision. And you'd hope that their parents, hopefully they listen to this podcast, but you'd hope that their parents encourage them to make a better decision for their health. But like to not even give them that option, like you said, it's literally like a form of child abuse of like, you're not even giving them a shot at school when that could be their main meal.
Right. It's a scary world we're living in. And then now we're seeing food become such a political talking point. We're seeing these politicians go on the campaign trail and they're pointing at animal agriculture and saying, we're going to fix climate change by changing consumer habits. And how are they going to do that? They're going to slap sin taxes on meat and treat meat, a nutrient-dense product, like a cigarette. And 2, they want to tax emissions on beef producers. And they're going to tax me based on information that's not correct. So it's not right. And we don't live in a nanny state, right? So we don't tell people what to eat. We sure try to in the dietary guidelines, but that's a whole topic for another day. But seriously, like we live in the land of the free, and it gets really scary as a producer and a beef consumer listening to this kind of stuff, because they truly do want to make meat more expensive, and so it's inaccessible to the average consumer here in the U.S.
It's crazy, and I've been seeing a lot of that come up more and more in political talks because it's such a hot topic. Yeah. And one of the things, like, to put the carbon emissions in perspective, because I think you did a great job talking about, like literally like 0.37% if you just go meatless Monday. Like, it's not going to move the needle. But like I was talking, and this was kind of my open, I guess, video to Arnold Schwarzenegger, was like he's like this icon, this hero of mine that I grew up to. But you think about it, like I think one of the reasons that the meatless aspect has gotten so much attention, which is kind of interesting, is because you're seeing these companies like Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat, like literally trying to create something that looks like the very thing that they're trying not to consume, so much so that they artificially like make it look like it's bleeding. That's a whole nother interesting aspect. But like one of the main ingredients in that is like in one of the burgers is mung bean protein. And like the number one producer, I did a bunch of like analysis on this. The number one producer of mung bean protein is in Myanmar. And so I calculated the carbon emissions of one flight from Myanmar to California, which is where they do their production. And that would be the equivalent of eating like 4 ounces of meat twice a day for like 90 years. Like one flight of like to make this burger. And I'm like just to put people lose perspective of like how much like one flight or driving in your car or overeating and throwing things out and having all this plastic waste, all of that, like we kind of shun that away because it's like, oh yeah, I know that, but like, oh, meat is the one thing they focus on, and we lose sight of things.
Yeah, and that's been really frustrating in the animal agricultural community because these companies, first of all, they're stealing our name, like our reputable beef or meat or whatever, and they're slapping it on their products and trying to sell their products right next to ours in the meat case. And I think it's dishonest to the consumer and not transparent. I don't want to accidentally buy like a plant-based, beef crumble or something if it's, in the meat case. But while they're stealing our, reputable name nomenclature, they're also claiming to have the high ground on, nutrition and sustainability, and they're not substantiating any of these claims. And so it seems like they're propping up their own businesses in their rush to get, a return on their investment. And to do that, they're stepping on the backs of hardworking ranchers, who have produced beef for generations. And it's frustrating and it's challenging because we want them to be held to the same standards and the burden of proof that we have had to do for all these years. And we do have the proof on our side, and we do have the science to back why we do what we do in production agriculture, but science isn't sexy. It's not, it doesn't make good headlines. It's boring. But what is really cool and a lot of hype is these, Impossible Burgers or the Beyond Burgers. And I honestly will contend that I think it's more hype than actual sales because I just don't see the consumer that would really want it. It's not the health conscious consumer because look at the ingredient list. It's a mile long. Like, no, it's basically a Doritos in a patty form, and it's not, I think right now it's a novelty and people just want to try it. But I guess maybe I'm naive in saying this, but I still think beef is going to be king at the meat case. But yeah, they're all the talk in all the circles in and outside of agriculture. So it's interesting to follow anyway.
It is. And yesterday I was watching football, and all I kept seeing were these advertisements for Burger King now offering, I think it's the Impossible Burger. And like you said, I'm like flabbergasted at the concept. Like it's in everywhere. Like all of these chains are selling, and they're like supposedly selling out of it. And one of the things, like supposedly based on like the analytics that are coming back, it's not just vegans or vegetarians that are consuming it. It's people that are meat eaters that want a healthier alternative. And in reality, you're like, you're making the wrong choice. Like it's not a healthy alternative.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is interesting to say the least. And I do quite a bit of speaking, traveling, talking to agricultural groups and talking about these plant-based, but also the cell-cultured proteins or the lab meats that are claiming the very same things. Like we use less land and fewer resources, and we're going to be more nutritious because we can control, the types of fats in the burger. And it just largely ignores what that incredible beef cow can do, in addition to providing that nutrient-dense product, all the byproducts as well. And we haven't even talked about this, but my cows can go outside and they can graze on grass, which is obviously inedible by humans, and they can upcycle it into a nutrient dense product. And so if cows weren't grazing on some of this land or eating things like corn stalks or beet pulp or cottonseed hulls or, potato skins or all the things that would otherwise end up in landfills, they again are able to convert those ingredients into something that humans can consume. And so, it's just super frustrating, and we've definitely been keeping an eye on that. But it's, like I said, the burden of proof needs to be placed on these companies to actually back up the claims that they're making.
Right, and I think it would be super interesting to look at like full-scale production from like a ranch like yours, carbon emissions versus like full-scale production of what it takes to make an Impossible Burger, like from start to finish on the table. I think people would be blown away by probably more CO2 emissions coming from that Impossible Burger manufacturing and that entire production than literally straight cattle straight to your table.
Right. Oh, I would agree. And then if you add in the extra element of calculating the nutrients per calorie, like beef wins every time. It's just, but it seems like that piece really is missing when it comes to making dietary choices for the betterment of our planet. And I really wish people would think about that. Like, which foods are going to fuel my body and my brain and lead to me being, like you said, the best human you can be, and also living a long, healthy life, where we also have to calculate the costs and the emissions of like medical treatments and interventions and long-term disease. What is the impacts of that if we're not eating healthful foods? And again, that's really hard to measure, but to me, that's part of the puzzle as well.
Really great point, and people often don't think about that. Like the healthcare cost. What is the cost of that? Not only for like financial costs, but like for our environment. Like what is the cost of like having people who have brittle bones because they're not properly supplementing on their vegan or vegetarian diet, or people who are losing muscle mass and atrophying, and now that's weighing on their family and that's costing family diet. Like there's a lot more that you said that needs to be unpackaged versus this like high surface level overview of like, oh, it's just carbon emissions. These cows and cattle are having so much problems on our environment. We need to get rid of them and do meatless Mondays or go completely to this. There's a lot more that's like kind of in that package that people aren't looking at.
Right. And I think too, it's frustrating. I believe in the value of a person, and that we each have like a divine value and talent to add to this world, and to lower the value of a human being to just their emissions. This is what I emit. Like, no, I think, you and me and every single person listening to this has far more value than just that simple, piece of the pie. And so I think it ignores that as well, that it's not as, like so many things in life, it's not black and white, and it's not as simple as we want to make it out to be. And, skipping a burger on Mondays may make you feel like you're doing something for the environment. But if you really deep dive into it, there's a lot better ways we can impact planetary health in the long term than skipping an entire food group like meat.
100%. And like, I think I saw someone else posted this picture of like a vegan activist that was holding up a sign, but then like went back to his like sports car and he was driving that. And you're like, are you really helping the environment?
Yeah, hypocrisy runs deep sometimes. But that's what's in the news every single day. It's not our cars. And it kind of makes me, and my husband would say this is like my tinfoil hat coming on, but like I feel like it's a distraction from what's really going on, and like what are actually the biggest greenhouse gas emissions. And we know it's transportation and it's electricity. And so what haven't the fossil fuel industries figured out yet that they want us to be looking over at agriculture? You know what I mean? And so I think we've figured a lot of things out. And Frank Mitloehner says that in that blog that I mentioned today. He says, I think that a beef producer deserves a lot of credit for, producing more beef with fewer resources. And yet, gosh, it's the cows, right? And I say kind of cheekily too, if emissions from cows were so bad, we would have smog in South Dakota. Cows outnumber people 4-1 here, and the air is pretty fresh and clean. So, but that's just me being probably sassy.
That's awesome. What's one of the big things that comes up that I don't know a ton about is like the amount of water that's utilized for cows versus like the amount of water that's utilized, say, to harvest crops like grains and tofu and all that stuff.
Ooh, you're gonna test my knowledge here. So I can probably look this up. We might have to pause this to look it up because I can give you some really good information on this if I can
Yeah, I,
find it.
I'm super interested in it because I've talked a lot about the carbon emissions aspect of like just like driving a car, flying in an airplane, all of those other aspects. And I don't even think like when you really unpackage it, like you said, and you really have the facts like you talked about, it's not even an argument. It's not even something that can do it. But like the one thing that I just am uncertain on is the amount, like the water usage. I think that's one
Sure.
of the biggest things that people always ask me.
Well, yeah, I get asked this all the time too, and I should have it like off the top of my head. But I will say one thing while I'm looking it up here, is that the cattle water is in a cycle. And so, the cattle, they consume the water or they eat the grass, but then they obviously digest it. The urine, the manure goes back onto land, and it's kind of in a cycle. So hold on, let me see if I have found it. Okay, so according to, and this of course is, people are going to say that it's biased because it's from beefitswhatsfordinner.com, but maybe I'll start. Maybe you want to ask that question over, and I can, right? You can edit this sort of.
Yeah.
Maybe.
No, you could just answer it, and we'll put it in there.
Okay, sounds good. So now let me see if I found it. So the USDA's Agriculture Research Service did a comprehensive life cycle assessment, looking at things like greenhouse gas emissions, grain consumption, fossil fuel inputs, and water use. And I think it's really important to note on the water side, it takes on average 308 gallons of water to produce a pound of boneless beef. Now, previous reports have estimated upwards of 24,000 gallons. Additionally, water used by beef is only around 5% of U.S. water withdrawals. And again, this water is recycled. So when that cow is grazing, she is also, urinating, dropping manure, which is enriching the soil, and the cycle starts back again. And so it's not just a wasted water, if that makes sense.
Got it. So it's recycled. So it's kind of like I think that's where a lot of people lose sight of that as well. Because I mean, if you think about it, grains and those have to be watered as well. I don't think it's a big disparity between the two because I know water is one of the big concerns of like we're going to run out, and a lot of it's being used for these cattle who we don't need to be eating. That's one of the pro like arguments for the vegan and vegetarians. But like you just kind of hit the nail on the head with that.
Well, and like 308 gallons still sounds like a lot if you're like, oh, wow. But think about all the ways we use water in like non-essential ways, swimming pools, watering our lawns, the things that we really could do without. And yet we do it because we like pretty green grass in front of our houses and we like going swimming with our kids. But if we were talking about like true essentials, I guess I can't fault a beef cow for drinking water and turning that water into a nutrient-dense food like beef that nourishes people.
Exactly. And think about like how many times when I was a kid, like when I was just sitting there brushing my teeth, I probably wasted 3 gallons of water or in the shower for an
Right.
hour, like falling asleep before I was going to school. Like that was probably 50 to 100 gallons a day that just wasted that didn't
Right.
do anything.
Exactly.
So I think we lose context of that kind of in
Yeah.
daily life.
Mhm.
So we talked a little bit about eating less in general. What are some of the things that like when you're giving these talks and maybe you're talking to people, what's like is there too much meat? Like is it too much? I'm a big Brazilian steakhouse guy, but like is there a way where it's like you probably shouldn't be eating that much all the time, or is it fine?
We live in like a gluttonous society, right? Where we eat probably more of anything that we, need. We truly probably do. And, I talk to agricultural groups and I'm a huge proponent to these groups, like trying to give them the nutritional messaging that they can go out and then talk to consumers about. And I was at a recent meeting and this rancher came up to me and he was like, but there is such a thing as too much beef. And, he's the one that's raising the beef. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess you could say I'm biased in that I raise beef, so I want people to just eat a lot of it. But to me, I guess there's such a thing as, maybe too many calories or too much of a good thing. But when it's like a nutrient dense product like beef and you're eating it to satiety or to the point where you're fueling your body, like to me, I don't think that's gluttonous. To me, what's maybe the problem is eating too many empty calories that are void of nutrition and aren't fueling your body or, fueling your brain, and they aren't, making the wheels turn. And I think if we're truly in tune with our bodies and eating nutrient dense products, our bodies naturally tell us how much is enough. But when you're eating things like cake and candy and chips, the reward centers in our brains turn on, and there is no such thing as too much. I could eat and eat and eat sugar and my body would never tell me that's too much, because it's the same as, what do they say? It's the same triggers as like cocaine or something. It lights up our brains. But I don't think a food like beef does that.
Great points. One of the things I forgot to ask earlier is one of the big things that was in the news, and I think this probably raised a lot of attention, was like, I believe it was like the Amazon fires. And there's a lot of people who were blaming that on cattle and beef and meat. Did you see all that stuff in the news?
I did, yes. So a few things I want to say on that. Like, if there's truly, I'm not a Brazilian rancher, so I can't claim to be an expert. And if there truly is, forests that are being plowed down just for cattle grazing, I'm not going to condone that, because I see the U.S. and we have wide open spaces and pastures, and we can produce beef here on the land that's best suitable for it. However, I think one thing people don't understand about those Amazon pictures, and this is me like asking locals, is that a lot of those pictures, it was the grassland around the trees that was on fire. And for people to understand nature, so wildfires naturally happen. And when they do, they promote new growth on the land. But without cattle, what happens is the brush kind of takes over, and these wildfires have rapid fuel to spread hard and to spread fast. And so we're seeing this in California, right, where they have the policy to leave the land untouched and unmanaged. And so livestock have been removed from the landscape. And maybe this correlates, perhaps it does not, but we are seeing, these heavy, huge, violent, ginormous, damaging wildfires, when if they could simply reintroduce, ruminant animals like cattle, sheep, and goats, there wouldn't be as much fuel in the form of dead underbrush for these fires to eat up. And so from what I understand in the Amazon, that's the same thing as that has happened, is these natural, rebirthing wildfires that are taking place, and it results in, better rangeland, healthier forests. It's just part of it. And there's also some really great information out there in that, that claims that Amazon is like 20% of our oxygen, and it's the world's lungs, and those have been like largely inflated as well. So but from that perspective, I just wish people understood the role of good management practices on the land, and that just leaving it alone is sometimes worse than actually having people on the land working it and responsibly utilizing that range.
Absolutely. Very, very good explanation. So we're coming to an end, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there are some questions that I wanted to ask you about. Okay. One of which is, I don't know, have you met or talked with a guy named Paul Saladino?
I have not, no.
I have to connect you guys. He is a huge voice in the carnivore world, and is a huge advocate of meat. And one of the things that he's big on is nose to tail, like eating nose. Like if you're going to go carnivore, make sure you're having organ meat, make sure you're having that. Now with your cattle, is that something that you guys also like harvest? Like, do you guys keep the organ meats? Do you use like all aspects about the animal, or is it just the muscle meat?
Right. So we butcher our own animals, or I guess I don't butcher them personally, but we harvest our own animals and keep them in our freezer. And yeah, we have everything. The internal fat, we get chunks of that, and maybe you could make tallow with it. We have the liver and the heart and the tongue and all of these things that in the United States we don't really eat anymore. We export them to places like Japan, where they're considered a delicacy. But yeah, we have it all in our freezer. I think, conventional muscle cuts are as healthy as you can get, but if you're intuitively eating and you feel like, you're low on iron or you're feeling a little weak or anemic, then yeah, those rich, nutrient dense, internal cuts, or the organs, I should say, the offal, we call them in the beef industry, those have a lot of value to them. And I would point people to stories like the book Fat of the Land, which talks about the Inuits and how they used to eat, all like entirely carnivorous, because obviously they live in the tundra. You're not growing berries and lettuce, but they would eat seals and whales, and they would eat, the blubber and the organs, and they thrived as a society. Also, eating a carnivorous way would be like the Sioux Indians or the Indians of the plains. I'm sure they might get seasonal berries, but the majority of the time, it's cold, and they were hunting bison, and they were eating, nose to tail, that bison animal, and using every bit of the animal. And so if we look back in history, I always tell people there are lots of societies that have proven that a nutrient dense diet that we can really thrive on centers around meat. And there's not so many great examples of societies for the long term that can prove like a vegan or vegetarian diet is great for generations. And so, yeah, Fat of the Land is a great book if you haven't checked it out yet.
I definitely will. I have to look at that. Now, one of the questions, and I'm personally just very curious on this. Have you, like, growing up, I'm sure you have you had to like watch, like, grow one of your own cows, for instance, and then butcher it yourself?
So I grew up showing in 4-H. Do you know what 4-H is? Or okay, so 4-H is like it's a youth and agriculture program. So if you went to like a state fair or something, there's kids that show livestock, right? And so there's articles that come out that say, 4-H is promoting, youth to become cold-blooded serial killers, because at the end of the day, that market animal is destined for the freezer, right? So, but again, it goes back to understanding that circle of life, and we're taught that from a very young age. So my husband, Tyler, he actually grew up in a butcher family. So they own a butcher shop, and he grew up, harvesting these animals, and really, could tell you the process and do the process himself. I actually met my husband working at the meat lab at South Dakota State University. So we were butchering animals. And so I have seen the harvesting of these animals. But yeah, we see death here on the ranch. I mean, we see baby calves that maybe don't make it. We raise up a steer, and we know that it's, again, destined for the freezer, and we've cared for it, and we understand that's what's going to happen. It's a delicate subject because people really, they can't imagine doing that, and it's hard, but again, it's part of my responsibility as a rancher to respectfully harvest these animals to better humanity. And I truly think the beef cow offers us a lot of great and valuable gifts because of what she's able to do on the land and as a beef product.
Right, and I think it's one of the most powerful pieces. It is a tough topic for people to even think about, but like, my friends Ben Greenfield and Mike Mutzel actually is a friend, and he does that with like his pigs. Like he shows that like every day he's like, hey, but like eventually these are going to be sacrificed. But like, I think as a educated like meat eater, I think it's something that you should understand, because a lot of people, like you said, are just so removed from it, and it's just like, oh, that doesn't happen. But like, I think it brings a different level of appreciation when you understand like the life cycle of like, this animal was meant for nourishment, and it's going to nourish me, and I'm not going to take that for granted anymore. Because the minute like you see that process, it's like gut wrenching, but you understand like there's a lot of fuel, amino acids, things in there that are going to help a lot of people. You never take that for granted anymore. Like you never like go to that gluttonous aspect of like, oh, I'm just going to have, you know what, I was hungry, so instead of one Big Mac, I'm going to have 4. And it's just like, well, like, no, you appreciate it at a whole different level. And I'd imagine like you and the individuals you work with, just ranchers in general, like have a deeper level of appreciation that most people just can never understand.
Absolutely. I mean, if you've been with that animal from the time they're born until the time you're sending them to the butcher, it is a true level of respect for that animal, far different than these activists who, they've probably never seen a cow in their life, and they're claiming to have the compassion or the moral high ground while they're also threatening to like kill my family or, you know, have my children taken away from me. Yeah, we respect the animal, and there's like a great deal of pride too in our community. So how can we do better to make that product as tasty as it can be, as healthful, as safe, and nutritious? You know, what does their ration look like, their diets, right? You know, even just what the cow eats impacts the flavor profile of that steak. And so it is really interesting to me. We can see the different diets and how it impacts that final product, and it can make us, you know, be better producers as well. And so, yeah, when I go to a steakhouse, I definitely pay attention to like the flavor notes and the things like that, and kind of understanding how it got to be that way versus, you know, the average consumer that's going to have that steak. But yeah, we're proud of what we do, and we respect that beef animal. And because we're in it day in and day out, maybe I suppose you could say we're desensitized to it, but I would think it's just this high level of understanding of that circle of life that we have, that not everybody has that vantage point to be able to understand it like that.
Right. Now, one of the questions I want to ask you is probably in relation to the flavor, but like, what are your thoughts, and what are a lot of ranchers' thoughts in general, just about like grass-fed versus grass-finished? Like I know there's a lot of marketing around like hey, there's some animals that are grass-fed and they might be grass-fed for like 2 weeks and then they're corn-fed for the rest of their life. But like the difference between just regular non-grass-fed, but then there's grass-fed and there's grass-fed, grass-finished. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm really glad you asked that, because I feel like there's a lot of consumers that feel guilty if they can't afford like the organic, the natural, the grass-fed. And my best advice to people is eat the meat that you like and that you can afford. So if you want to shop your values and you really feel great about, you know, buying organic or grass-fed or whatever, do that, but also know that the conventional beef is far more nutritious than a lot of foods that you could pick at the grocery store, right? So even just looking at like the omega-3s of grass-fed versus grain-fed, it is so marginal, the difference between the two, that you would be better off, you know, getting a salmon or something else if you were really concerned about omega-3s. And so, you know, it's minuscule, and you'd have to eat so much grass-fed beef to get like the omega-3 benefits, if that makes sense. So what I tell people, the various differences is really your taste. So your grass-fed is going to be, you know, perhaps a little bit leaner. It's going to be more like gamier, or kind of like a woody finish to the fat profile. Whereas the grain-fed beef is going to be a little fattier. It's going to be a little bit of sweeter taste on the fat side of things. And it really comes down to taste preference to me. And so, like I said, eat what you like and you can afford. And, you know, don't let the little nuances, you know, and different production methods keep you from eating a nutrient-dense food, no matter which label you're picking.
Amazing. And I want to wrap this up with just talking about you and some of the future and outlook for everything you're doing. First, you have, I think it's 2 children's books, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about those?
I do. Yes. So I have 2 books. One's titled Levi's Lost Calf, and the other is Can Do Cow Kids. And they're both on Amazon, but you can also shop my personal website, amandaradke.com. And the reason I wrote these books is because I wanted to promote agricultural literacy and, you know, how our food gets to the dinner table to elementary school students. And again, it goes back to that Disney effect. That's what they think. And so these books really feature the rancher as the main character, and it highlights the relationship that rancher has to the animals and also to the land. And so we kind of see that working relationship between the cows, the wildlife, the pastures, and what that rancher does as a steward. And so, yeah, it's a passion project of mine, and I encourage folks, if they're interested in ranch life from the perspective of a rancher, they're pretty neat stories for kids, and they're designed to go in the classroom. And so they have the classroom materials, the vocab list, you know, if kids don't know what a heifer or bull is and that kind of thing. And yeah, it gets me fired up, and that's one of my passions is getting out there and sharing our story with kids.
Amazing. And we'll definitely post that, because I think that I wish I would have had that as a tool when I was younger. That's one of my good friends. I know he's going to be super interested in this. Danny Vega, he's very big on educating his kids on this. And someone else I'll have to introduce you to. But one of the big questions I have for just in general, us as a community, because the keto community, a large majority of them are meat eaters. What can we do to help spread this information? Like, what can, like, as a community, what is there to like help overcome, to help spread the mission and everything that you guys are doing?
Well, I appreciate you asking that because I think you guys are like the best advocates we have because you're experiencing great health benefits from eating something that I'm producing, right? You appreciate beef and meat in general, and you can talk about the best ways you cook it. You know, what are your favorite recipes? You know, how do you eat it on the go? How do you plan to get your protein in through the day, you know, as a busy, you know, athlete or parent or whatever? How does meat fit in your diet? And on the flip side, you know, the health stories are incredible that you read, the things that people have been able to, you know, the disease they've been able to battle, the health recovery, like you said, the vegan recovery groups, you know, these people have incredible testimonies. And sometimes it's hard to share those testimonies with the general public because, you know, immediately as soon as people hear you're eating differently than the standard American diet, they question if you're going to live or if you're going to drop dead tomorrow, right? So yeah, anytime you can share, you know, best recipes, best health stories that you have, we appreciate it. And I fully embrace this community because I know you're strong customers and you appreciate what we're doing too. So I think we could actually work together a lot more than we have. It's just a matter of connecting people. And that's why I was so excited that Sean Baker was invited to an agricultural meeting because I was like, oh, hey, these really two cool worlds that I'm passionate about are colliding. And it's so, because even the rancher has been told forever that he should eat only lean meat and in moderation. And so our community has bought into that dietary advice as much as the next. And so you'd think we'd know better, but we don't. And there's still a lot of health problems in the farming and ranching community as well. And so that information needs to be shared far and wide.
Perfect. Well, we'll do our best to help spread that message and help support you guys because I think you're doing amazing work. And it's not just like it's the education piece behind that. I think that's so powerful. And like I said, I'm completely open to people's perspective and opinions on anything. But like what you guys are doing, you're providing the information to go, hey, listen, there's a lot of noise that's out there right now. We're trying to combat it and actually bring the scientific evidence to go, this is actually why it's beneficial to eat meat. And here's why. So,
and I think if I could add too, the agricultural community is really suffering right now. So inputs are rising, regulatory burdens are huge, retailer pressures are great, debt loads are rising, and it's been really tough markets as well. Not to mention there's been catastrophic weather, you know, things happening from like the floods in Nebraska to some of these wildfires, blizzards, hurricanes, you name it. So the rancher really gets hit with all of these different things externally that we can't control. And so the best support that we can ask for is for the people who appreciate what we do to help us share our stories, because I'm afraid that we're going to keep losing more ranchers, and I'm not sure who the next generation of food producers are going to be in this country as a result.
Now, with your ranch specifically, do you guys just sell into stores, or can people like go to a website and buy it directly?
Oh, I sure wish I could get you guys to buy my steaks, but no, we don't sell direct to the consumer at this point. It's always something I've wanted to do, whether it be like a subscription beef box or, you know, something of that nature. Like I said, my husband's family did grow up, you know, selling beef as a butcher shop, but it's very hard educating people on, you know, buying like a quarter or a half of a cow. There's a lot of like misinformation out there too, where they, you know, forget to calculate the, you know, that in their price that they're also buying bone, or they're not going to get a quarter of a 1,300-pound steer. They're going to get a quarter of the carcass, you know, the edible parts of that steer. And so it is a lot of work. And for the producers that do that, it takes a lot of education, like a steep uphill climb to getting, you know, certified and inspected. One group I will direct you towards is Ranch Wives Beef Co. And it's two ranch women based out of Nebraska and Montana, and they better send me a commission for this. But they're my friends. I've just met them on Instagram, but they have like a subscription beef model, and every single day on Instagram they're talking about how that beef is raised, and they're sharing their stories, and it's a really cool thing that they're doing.
Amazing. Now, your top priority, last question, your top priority as far as like being a huge advocate in the meat industry, what are some of the main, like obviously this Impossible Beyond Burger food stuff is a big, like educating over top of that. What are some of the, you just mentioned another one is that there's a lot of price, like a lot of challenges as far as being an actual rancher. What are some other things as far as like in the meat industry that you're facing? Are those the main ones, like over educating, like out educating a lot of the other agendas and really making sure that people are buying like buying meat still? Are those really the two?
Right. I would say, weather, markets, and then societal misconceptions and trying to kind of turn that ship around would be big ones. And we do predict that, the U.S. consumer might go towards a more plant-based diet. And so really a lot of our energies are focused on export markets, because around the world there's a growing middle class and they want to eat beef and they love our product, and they're not so much worried about all these, elitist 1%er problems where we're grumbling with full stomachs. This is the first time a lot of people in these countries are getting to eat meat, whereas before they were forced to eat rice and beans, and that's about it. And so a lot of our market share is going to be global and other places around the world, because it seems like the U.S. consumer just isn't quite so sure about what we're doing anymore.
And this is the question I ask everyone at the end of the podcast. I say, like, what legacy? Because you could sit back and you could just be a rancher and just go on your business, but like you're out front now, like you're trying to be a huge voice for not only like your ranch, but all ranchers in general, just meat and beef consumption. What legacy do you want to leave? Like at the end of your road, like what do you want people to be like, I remembered Amanda for this? Like what legacy do you want to leave?
I love this question. So, I wrote today on the blog a final letter to Ellen, because I doubt she's going to call me, right? But I told her I want her to know the heart of rural America, and that in agriculture, we truly are trying our best to be the stewards of, God's gifts. So the livestock, the wildlife, the land, and humanity. And our hearts are in the right place. And so I think this is going to launch for me an opportunity to talk about the hearts of farming and ranching country. Great example of this are a few organizations I got to give a shout out to. The All-American Beef Battalion, started by a Vietnam veteran named Bill Brody. He gives steaks to the troops as a way to say thank you. The Cowboys Who Care Foundation, they give custom cowboy hats to kids fighting cancer, so they too can feel like strong cowboys even after they lose their hair during chemo treatments. And the South Dakota Cattlemen's Foundation right here at home, they raise money to supply all of the state's food banks with beef. And so I think in rural America, we have really big hearts, and we're trying to do the best we can with limited resources. And I think we have a lot of great stories to share. So I guess my legacy would be, I want people to know I was a good person and truly did, follow my heart and lead with my passions and try to do the right thing for myself, for my kids, for my grandkids, and so that we can still have beef 100 years from now. That's kind of what fuels me every day.
Well, you're doing an incredible job, and I know you're going to continue doing that. And I hope to be able to help spread your message as much as possible and get more people out there. There's a lot of people after this I want to connect you with, because I would love to see you on their podcast and talking with them, because I know they'd love to have you share a lot of what you shared with me today. That being said, last thing, where can people find you? Like blog, your website, social media, all that stuff.
Sure. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Amanda Radke. Twitter is Radke Amanda. They can also check me out personally at amandaradke.com, or they can read my blog. I write every Monday through Thursday at beefmagazine.com.
Amazing. And we'll post all those in the show notes so people can find you. But again, Amanda, thank you so much. I've learned so much over the course of this last hour, and there's just a lot of great information that I think people overlook, and you did an amazing job at breaking that down, and I just want to say thank you for what you do. Thank you to all the ranchers that you're in contact with and that really are supplying us with nourishment to allow us to continue going on and be an optimal human being.
Yes, well, thank you for this opportunity. I tell you what, this is probably my most fun I've had in all the interviews I've done in the last 2 weeks, so I'm just thrilled to be on here, and I can't wait for this to air.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we'll talk soon.